Evelyn's footsteps echoed softly as she pushed her cleaning cart through the polished marble hallways of Hawthorne and Beck, the towering corporate headquarters at the heart of Dallas. The hustle and bustle of the office was in full swing. Executives, in crisp suits, secretaries huddled over desks, phones ringing, and meetings being held in glass-walled boardrooms. But Evelyn, with her dark green uniform and quiet demeanor, remained unnoticed. She had been the office cleaning lady for nearly a decade, and in all that time, she had never once been acknowledged beyond polite nods, if that. She swept floors, wiped down glass doors, emptied trash bins, and kept the building pristine. But behind that unassuming role, Evelyn was far more than anyone realized. She had watched, listened, and observed the company's powerful elite, Alan. Greaves, the CEO, the senior executives, and the managers who wielded influence with ruthless efficiency. They had never noticed her, of course. Why would they? She was just part of the background, a faceless entity whose sole purpose was to make their world spotless. But as time passed, Evelyn began to see things. Things that could topple their world. The greed, the backroom deals, the mistreatment of workers, the exploitation of employees. Evelyn had witnessed it all, and yet no one cared. The workers cleaned up after the board members, the executives signed checks and held meetings in their glass towers, and the cycle continued. But Evelyn could no longer stay silent. She knew the day would come when she would make them all see her. It wasn't just about cleaning anymore, it was about changing everything. Evelyn's days had always been predictable. Each morning, she arrived at the office before dawn, her cart loaded with cleaning supplies, brooms, dusters, glass cleaners, and floor polish. She worked in silence, making sure everything was spotless. She knew every inch of the building like the back of her hand. The rhythm of her work was almost meditative, but it was also a front, a perfect cover for her true mission. She was a ghost in a company full of people who thought they were too important to notice her. The people who walked past her every day were too absorbed in their own world to acknowledge her existence. But Evelyn had never been bothered by their indifference. She knew their secrets, the hush-hush conversations in the break room, the deals that happened behind closed doors, the whispers about the layoffs, and the promises to investors that were nothing more than empty words. The more she saw, the more disgusted she became. The system was rigged. The employees were treated like cogs in a machine, easily replaceable, while the executives grew wealthier and more powerful. Evelyn had grown tired of the complacency that surrounded her. It was time for a change. She knew it wouldn't happen on its own. She would have to be the one to change it. Every evening, she would return home to her modest apartment, the weight of the day's work still heavy on her shoulders. There, alone with her thoughts, she began to formulate a plan. The company would never see it coming. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Evelyn's breaking point came one late afternoon, as she overheard a conversation between two senior managers. She had been cleaning the conference room, silently moving around the long, glossy table, when she heard them laughing. "They're just numbers on a page," one of the managers said. "Cutting the bottom line will save us a fortune. Who cares if a few people lose their jobs? It's business. We have to do what's best for the company." The other manager chuckled. "Exactly. The board's going to love it. Will look great to investors, and no one will remember those employees next year." Evelyn's heart sank as she realized the depth of the cruelty they were discussing. These weren't just faceless numbers. They were real people, with families and bills to pay. The people they were talking about were her co-workers, the janitors, the secretaries, the office assistants, all at risk of losing their livelihoods without a second thought. It was a gut punch, and Evelyn's blood boiled. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced, her thoughts bouncing between outrage and resolve. She had worked for this company for far too long to stand by and do nothing. It was time to fight back, to make her presence known in a way they couldn't ignore. Evelyn had been patient, biding her time. But now it was no longer about cleaning floors. It was about cleaning up the corruption that had infected the entire company. She sat at her kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook. Outlining her plan, the CEO, Alan Greaves, and the senior managers would soon realize they had underestimated her. They had no idea what she was capable of. The time for silence was over. She would make sure they could never forget her name. Evelyn had kept a secret, for years, a secret so powerful that if anyone knew, it would change everything. It was a secret that had been passed down to her after her husband, Martin, passed away in a car accident. When Martin died, Evelyn inherited not just his savings, but also something far more valuable: shares in Hawthorne and Beck, the very company she had spent years working for. Her late husband had always been careful with money, investing wisely, but he had never boasted about his holdings. Evelyn had no idea the extent of his wealth until after his death. The shares he had acquired over the years had made her the majority shareholder in the company, granting her control over the very board that had treated her like a mere janitor. But she had kept this secret hidden, knowing it was too powerful, a weapon to use without careful consideration. It was only when she heard the conversation in the conference room that Evelyn realized the time had come. She could no longer hide in the shadows. The company's future was on the line, and if she didn't act, more lives would be ruined. The shares would be her weapon, and she would use them to take down the corrupt leadership and expose the truth. Evelyn knew she had the power to force change. She just had to be smart about how she wielded it. The plan was simple: expose the corruption, disrupt the power structure, and force the company to become a place where people were valued, not discarded. But first, she had to make her presence felt. She couldn't just walk into the boardroom as a janitor. She had to be more than that. The days that followed were filled with frenetic energy as Evelyn began to assemble a team. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help: people who knew the ins and outs of the company, people who had been wronged by the system, and people who could provide the legal and financial expertise she lacked. Her first step was reaching out to Daniel, a former employee who had been fired after speaking out about the company's unethical practices. Daniel had been an analyst in the finance department, and Evelyn knew he had inside knowledge that could be invaluable. He had been blacklisted by the company after they fired him under dubious circumstances, but Evelyn managed to get in touch with him through a mutual friend. Daniel agreed to meet her at a cafe on the outskirts of town. He was skeptical at first, unsure of her intentions, but when Evelyn revealed her secret, that she was the majority shareholder, his attitude shifted. She could see the disbelief in his eyes, but also the flicker of hope. "I've been waiting for someone to do something," Daniel said, leaning forward. "They can't keep getting away with this." Evelyn smiled. "Exactly. But we can't do this alone. We need to gather information, build our case, and expose them." Together, they began to gather the necessary evidence. They reached out to former employees, gathered financial reports, and compiled a list of unethical practices within the company. The task was daunting, but Evelyn was determined. She knew the truth was on their side. Now it was time to make sure the world saw it too. The more Evelyn and Daniel dug, the more they uncovered about the company's shady dealings. They found evidence of embezzlement, kickbacks, falsified reports, and unethical layoffs. The executives at Hawthorne and Beck had built their wealth on the backs of hard-working employees, exploiting them while lining their own pockets. But there was one document that caught Evelyn's eye: an email from Alan Greaves to his board of directors, detailing plans to outsource the majority of the company's labor to cut costs. The employees who had been with the company for years, many of them loyal, were going to be replaced by cheaper overseas labor. It was a cold and calculated decision, and it made Evelyn's blood boil. "We can't just expose this and hope for the best," Daniel said, after they reviewed the documents. "We need leverage, something they can't ignore." Evelyn nodded, a plan beginning to form in her mind. She didn't just want to expose them. She wanted to destroy the culture that allowed people like Greaves to thrive. To do that, they would need something that would hit the company at its core, something that would cripple its reputation. Her first move was to reach out to the media. She knew just the investigative journalist who could help them, Sarah Donovan, an award-winning reporter known for her exposés on corporate corruption. Evelyn had heard her name whispered in the hallways of Hawthorne and Beck. Sarah had once tried to uncover financial mismanagement at the company, but she had been shut down by powerful figures within the organization. When Evelyn called Sarah, and explained her plan. The reporter's skepticism quickly turned into interest. "You're telling me you're the majority shareholder? And you have evidence to back up everything you've said?" Evelyn's voice was steady. "Yes, I want to make them pay for what they've done." Sarah agreed to meet her the next morning. With her investigative skills and Evelyn's inside knowledge, they could expose the truth in a way that no one could ignore. They would give the company a scandal it couldn't recover from. With Sarah's help, the plan was set into motion. The next step was to go public with the evidence they had gathered. But Evelyn knew that this wasn't just about telling the truth, it was about ensuring the company's downfall. So she decided to organize a press conference, one that would be held at Hawthorne and Beck's headquarters. The day of the press conference arrived, and Evelyn stood in front of a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing in front of her. Daniel and Sarah stood by her side, their faces solemn but determined. Evelyn had never felt so powerful, but she also knew that this was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start. She cleared her throat before stepping up to the podium. "Good afternoon. My name is Evelyn Harper. I've worked for Hawthorne and Beck for over 10 years, and I'm here today to expose the truth. This company, led by CEO Alan Greaves, has built its fortune by exploiting its workers, mismanaging funds, and engaging in corrupt practices that harm not just employees but their families as well. I'm not here to just make noise. I'm here to take action." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent. The company's leadership has taken advantage of employees for far too long. They've cut jobs, misled investors, and hidden their true intentions behind closed doors. But I've gathered the evidence. Documents, emails, testimonies, proof that what they've been doing is illegal. I'm not just a janitor at this company. I am its largest shareholder, and I am taking control. The room erupted into chaos, cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. But Evelyn remained calm, knowing that the company could no longer escape the truth. The press conference was just the beginning. Within hours, the story broke across every major news outlet. Hawthorne and Beck's reputation was shattered, and the company's stock price plummeted. Alan Greaves and the other executives were under fire, with investigations launched into their financial dealings. Employees who had been laid off were speaking out, sharing their experiences of the company's treatment, and the public outrage grew by the hour. But with every victory came more challenges. The company's board tried to discredit Evelyn, questioning her motives and her credibility. They attempted to paint her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Greaves and his colleagues couldn't escape the truth. Evelyn's actions sent shockwaves through the corporate world. She became a symbol of resistance, a working-class woman who had risen from the shadows to take down the powerful elite. She was hailed as a hero by those who had been wronged by the company, but there were still many hurdles ahead. The legal battles were just beginning, and the executives would fight tooth and nail to avoid the consequences of their actions. Despite the challenges, Evelyn was undeterred. She had begun a movement, and there was no going back. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn found herself entrenched in legal battles. She was subpoenaed to testify in court, and her life was under constant scrutiny. The media followed her every move. But she remained focused on her mission. This was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about holding those responsible accountable. Daniel and Sarah were by her side, helping her navigate the complexities of the legal system and providing crucial support. The court case was long and drawn out, with both sides presenting their evidence. Greaves and his team of high-priced lawyers did everything they could to paint Evelyn as a vengeful employee, but the evidence they presented was irrefutable. One by one, witnesses came forward, some former employees, others disgruntled shareholders, each with stories of how the company had harmed them. It became clear that Hawthorne and Beck's culture of greed and corruption had been built on the suffering of others. Evelyn's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. She spoke with passion and conviction, detailing the ways the executives had exploited their power. When the judge's verdict finally came, it was a victory. The executives were found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and other criminal activities. Greaves and his team were sentenced to prison, and the company's board was restructured, with new leadership brought in to restore integrity. Evelyn's victory was hard-won, but it was worth every sacrifice. The company was now under new management, and the employees who had been wronged were being compensated. Evelyn, as the majority shareholder, was now in a position to shape the future of Hawthorne and Beck. She didn't seek personal gain. She sought justice for the workers, the people who had been discarded for so long. But as the dust settled, Evelyn knew her work wasn't done. There were other companies, other institutions that needed to be held accountable. Her fight was only beginning. And so Evelyn Harper, the woman who had been invisible for so long, became a force for change, a symbol of hope for those who had been overlooked and mistreated. She had proven that even the most silent voices could bring down the mighty. As she walked through the halls of Hawthorne and Beck once again, this time as a leader, she smiled. The company might never be the same, but the world had changed, for the better. And with that, Evelyn's story became a powerful testament to the strength of the unheard, the invisible, and the overlooked, who, when united by purpose and passion, can bring down even the mightiest of structures. As Evelyn stood on the rooftop, watching the city below, she realized her journey had only just begun. From a humble janitor to a symbol of resistance, she had torn down the walls of corruption and fought for justice. But her victory was more than just taking down Hawthorne and Beck. It was about reclaiming her voice and empowering others to do the same. The city sparkled beneath her, a reminder of the lives she had touched. Evelyn Harper wasn't just a name anymore, she was a beacon of hope. And as she walked away, ready for the next challenge, she knew that no battle was too big and no voice too small to make a difference. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed Evelyn's story, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Stay tuned for more.